Prince Wei-jun knelt before the golden altar, pressing his palms together in prayer. The heavy scent of burning incense filled his lungs as he sought guidance from the gods. "Your Highness," a soft voice called from behind him. He turned to see Kaisia approaching, her white ceremonial robes flowing like water around her graceful form. The morning sun caught the silver threads woven through her dark hair, marking her as a priestess blessed by the divine. Even in this sacred space, his heart quickened at the sight of her. "Kaisia," he said, rising to his feet and bowing respectfully. "I didn't expect to find you here so early." She smiled, though worry shadowed her eyes. "The gods whisper loudest in the quiet hours, my lord. I came seeking their counsel about the troubles plaguing our kingdom." Wei-jun nodded, understanding weighing heavy on his shoulders. Their father, King Lilong, grew weaker each day, and the court buzzed with whispers about succession. As the crown prince, the burden of leadership pressed down on him like a mountain, though he'd never spoken of this fear aloud. "And what do they tell you?" he asked gently. "That great change approaches," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The path ahead is shrouded, but I sense difficult choices await those we care for." Before he could ask what she meant, footsteps echoed through the temple. Wei-jun's younger brother Shi-an appeared in the doorway, his black robes dusty from travel, a leather satchel slung across his shoulder. Even here, in this holy place, he carried himself with the controlled tension of a soldier returning from campaign. "Brother," Shi-an said, his tone perfectly respectful yet somehow distant. "Mother requests your presence in the Eastern Pavilion. I've just returned from the border conflicts." Wei-jun felt the familiar complexity of emotions whenever Shi-an appeared. His brother had always been brilliant, deadlier than any blade, but there was something in his bearing that spoke of battles fought and blood spilled, necessary work that Wei-jun had never been asked to do. "Of course," Wei-jun replied. He turned back to Kaisia, bowing once more. "We'll continue our conversation later if you're willing." "I would welcome it, Your Highness," she said softly. As they walked toward the temple entrance, Wei-jun noticed how Shi-an's gaze lingered on Kaisia. His brother's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered there, a longing quickly suppressed. The morning air was crisp as they crossed the courtyard toward the royal quarters. Palace servants bowed deeply as they passed, but Wei-jun caught the way they watched Shi-an, with the same careful respect they showed a sheathed sword. "The border campaign was successful, I trust?" Wei-jun asked. "The mountain clans have been reminded why they should honor our treaties," Shi-an replied simply. Father was pleased with the efficiency of the resolution. Wei-jun winced internally. While he studied philosophy and statecraft, Shi-an fought wars. While he debated with ministers, Shi-an led soldiers into battle. It was necessary work, but it carved lines around his brother's eyes that shouldn't belong to a man of 22 years. They reached the Eastern Pavilion where Queen Qingfen waited, Shi-an's mother and the king's second wife. She rose gracefully as they approached, her face lighting with genuine warmth as she embraced her son. "My brave warrior returns," she said, touching the healing cut on Shi-an's cheek with maternal concern. "Another victory for the kingdom." "The kingdom endures," Shi-an replied, stepping back from her touch with the practiced ease of someone uncomfortable with affection. "Indeed it does, thanks to your strength," she continued, then turned to Wei-jun with a smile that seemed carefully constructed. "My dear Wei-jun, I wanted to discuss the wedding preparations. The people need celebration in these uncertain times." As she spoke of ceremonies and rituals, Wei-jun found his attention drifting to his brother, who stood silent nearby. Shi-an's hands bore fresh calluses from sword work, and his stance spoke of constant readiness, as if even in the safety of the palace, he expected attack. Later that evening, Wei-jun walked the corridors toward his chambers, his mind heavy with the weight of approaching kingship. The sound of steel against steel drew his attention toward the training yards, where flickering torchlight revealed a lone figure practicing sword forms. Shi-an moved through the combat sequences with deadly precision, his blade cutting patterns in the torchlit darkness. Each strike, each parry, each calculated step spoke of battles won through skill and ruthless necessity. The practiced dummy bore deep gouges from his blade, sawdust spilling like blood onto the packed earth. "Your Highness," his personal servant, Rong-in, called softly from the shadows. "You've been training for 3 hours. Perhaps rest." "I said I would return the mountain clans to compliance within a fortnight," Shi-an replied without pausing his routine. "I managed it in 10 days. Do you know why?" The older man, who had served Shi-an since childhood, remained wisely silent. "Because I don't rest when there's work to be done." Shi-an's blade swept in a killing arc that would have severed a man's spine. "Because someone has to do the ugly necessary things that keep this kingdom peaceful." He finally stopped, breathing hard, sweat gleaming on his skin despite the cool night air. In the distance, he could see light glowing from the palace windows where his brother no doubt studied scrolls and prepared for tomorrow's diplomatic meetings. Everything that should have been mine, he thought, then immediately crushed that treacherous whisper. Wei-jun was good, worthy, beloved by the people. He would make a fine king. But late at night, when exhaustion finally claimed him, Shi-an sometimes dreamed of what it would feel like to be loved instead of feared, to be welcomed home with joy instead of careful respect. "Clean the blade," he instructed Rong-in, "and prepare hot water. I need to wash the smell of war from my skin before I'm fit for polite company." As he walked toward his chambers, he caught sight of warm light spilling from the temple windows. Kaisia would be there, performing evening prayers, her voice lifting in songs to gods who seemed to smile more readily on gentle souls than on those stained with blood. He paused in the corridor, allowing himself the dangerous luxury of imagining what it would feel like to walk through those temple doors and be welcomed by someone who saw him as more than just the kingdom's weapon. But such thoughts were for fools and dreamers. Shi-an was neither. The next morning brought news of Wei-jun's upcoming wedding to Kaisia, and with it, a summons from his mother. Shi-an found Queen Qingfen in her private garden, tending to white roses with the same careful attention she brought to all her schemes. She looked up as he approached, her face brightening with maternal pride. "My son," she said, setting aside her gardening tools. "You look tired." "The campaign was difficult." "No more than any other," he replied, though they both knew this was a lie. Each war carved something away from him, leaving him sharper but more brittle. "Good." Her voice carried satisfaction. "Your father speaks highly of your victories. He calls you his greatest weapon." The words should have brought pride, but instead they settled like stones in Shi-an's chest. A weapon. Not a son, not a prince worthy of love and respect, but an instrument of war to be wielded when needed. "The wedding approaches quickly," his mother continued, watching his face carefully. "It must pain you to see what should rightfully be yours given to another." Shi-an stiffened. The priestess chose her heart. "I respect that choice." "Do you?" Queen Qingfen moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You've served this kingdom faithfully, spilled your blood in foreign lands, made yourself feared so that others might sleep safely. And your reward is to watch your gentler brother claim both crown and bride. Wei-jun will make a good king. A weak king. The northern lords already whisper that he lacks the strength to hold the kingdom together when your father dies." Her hand touched his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You are the one they fear. Fear can be more valuable than love, my son." Before he could respond, footsteps approached through the garden. They both turned to see a man in common clothes walking toward them, weathered, scarred, with the particular stillness that marked professional killers. "Your Majesty," the man said, bowing to Queen Qingfen while his eyes measured Shi-an with uncomfortable intensity. "This is not the time," she replied sharply, but Shi-an caught the exchange of a small leather pouch that clinked with gold. The stranger's gaze fixed on Shi-an for a long moment, as if memorizing his face, before he melted back into the shadows between the garden walls. "Who was that?" Shi-an demanded. "No one of consequence," his mother said, but her smile was sharp as winter. "Just a man who understands that sometimes change requires decisive action." That evening, as Shi-an sat in his austere chambers, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger's eyes had been measuring him not as a client, but as a potential obstacle. 3 days before the wedding, Wei-jun found himself in the royal library, seeking counsel from ancient texts about leadership and the weight of crowns. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like the spirits of long-dead kings. "Your Highness," came a familiar voice behind him. He turned to see his father's chief advisor, Minister Hakuin, approaching with scroll-laden arms and the perpetual furrow of worry that had deepened since the king's illness. "Minister," Wei-jun acknowledged. "You look troubled." "The kingdom faces challenges, Your Highness." The northern provinces report renewed unrest among the mountain clans, despite Prince Shi-an's recent diplomatic success. Hakuin's careful choice of words spoke volumes about the methods his brother employed. "The clans test us whenever they sense weakness," Wei-jun replied, accepting a scroll detailing grain shortages. "What of the eastern territories?" "Secured, but at a cost. The lords there submit to the crown, but they speak of Prince Shi-an with the sort of fear usually reserved for natural disasters." "Effective, yes, but—" The older man trailed off. "But fear without respect breeds resentment," Wei-jun finished. "I understand your concern." As they discussed kingdom matters, footsteps echoed from the library entrance. Both men looked up to see Shi-an approaching, still wearing travel clothes from another border inspection. "Brother," Shi-an said, bowing formally. "Minister Hakuin. I bring word from the southern garrisons." "More troubles?" Wei-jun asked. "Nothing that couldn't be resolved with proper incentives," Shi-an replied, his tone neutral. But Wei-jun noticed the fresh bandage on his brother's sword hand and the way he favored his left shoulder slightly. Minister Hakuin cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss security arrangements for the wedding ceremony. Captain Ming Hao has expressed concerns about crowd control and sightlines." "What sort of concerns?" Wei-jun asked. "The temple's architecture presents challenges," the minister replied carefully. "Multiple balconies, numerous entry points. It would be difficult to secure completely." Shi-an stepped forward, his expression sharp with sudden interest. "I could review the arrangements. I have experience with defensive positions." "That would be helpful," Wei-jun said, though something in his brother's eagerness made him uneasy. After Minister Hakuin departed, the brothers remained alone among the ancient books. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "You seem troubled," Wei-jun observed finally. Shi-an's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Troubled? I've just spent a month reminding rebellious lords why they should fear the crown's displeasure. Some might call that troubling work. Someone has to do it." "Yes," Shi-an agreed quietly. "Someone has to be the kingdom's sword while others get to be its heart." The words carried more pain than resentment, and Wei-jun felt a pang of guilt. How many times had he sent his brother to handle problems too ugly for diplomatic solutions? How often had he been grateful for Shi-an's willingness to bear that burden? "I don't take your service lightly," Wei-jun said softly. "Don't you?" Shi-an's eyes met his, and for a moment, the careful mask slipped to reveal something raw and vulnerable beneath. "When did you last ask what those campaigns cost me? What it feels like to come home covered in other men's blood, knowing that everyone who welcomes me back is afraid of what I might do to them?" "Shi-an, forget I spoke." The mask snapped back into place, cold and impenetrable. "The wedding will be beautiful. The priestess will make you happy. The kingdom will prosper under your gentle rule." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Just remember, brother, Not all threats come from outside our borders. Sometimes the greatest dangers wear familiar faces. After he left, Wei-jun stood alone among the books, wondering when the chasm between them had grown so wide that even honest conversation felt like crossing a battlefield. That night, Captain Ming Hao knocked on his door with troubling news. "Your Highness, forgive the intrusion, but there have been unusual activities around the temple. Unknown men asking questions about the ceremony schedule, sightlines from various positions." "What sort of men?" "The sort who know how to kill quietly, my lord." The captain's weathered face was grave. "Prince Shi-an has also been asking detailed questions about guard positions during the ceremony." Wei-jun felt ice form in his stomach. "What kind of questions?" "Specific ones about the balcony positions, the temple's blind spots, the timing of the ritual processions." Captain Ming Hao met his eyes steadily. "It could be innocent concern for security. Or it could be something else entirely," Wei-jun finished. As he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, Wei-jun tried to reconcile the brother who had just spoken of coming home covered in blood with the one who might be planning to spill more at his wedding. Was Shi-an's interest in security arrangements genuine protection, or was he planning something that would shatter more than just Wei-jun's wedding day? The wedding was in 2 days. Whatever the truth, he would learn it soon enough. The night before the wedding ceremony, Shi-an walked the palace corridors like a restless spirit, sleep impossible with tomorrow's weight pressing on his mind. His steps carried him without conscious direction toward the eastern wing, where soft voices from his mother's chambers made him pause in the shadows. Through the slightly open door, he glimpsed movement, his mother speaking with someone in hushed, urgent tones. Curiosity overrode caution as he pressed closer to listen. "Temple balcony offers the perfect position," Queen Qingfen was saying. "When they take their sacred vows, all eyes will be on the altar." "And the target?" came an unfamiliar voice, rough with the accent of the outer provinces. Shi-an's blood chilled as he recognized the stranger from the garden, the man with killer's eyes who had studied him so intently. He leaned closer, catching only fragments through the thick wooden door. "Clean strike, chaos will provide. Payment as promised." The conversation was too muffled to follow completely, but those few words combined with the sight of gold-changing hands painted a picture that made his stomach turn to ice. His mother was meeting with a professional killer on the eve of Wei-jun's wedding, discussing temple positions and targets. Shi-an pressed himself against the wall as footsteps approached the door. The assassin emerged, moving with predatory silence through the corridor. For a heart-stopping moment, their eyes met in the dim torchlight. The killer's hand drifted toward the blade at his hip, but Shi-an remained perfectly still, every instinct screaming danger. After what felt like an eternity, the man continued past, disappearing into the maze of servant passages that honeycombed the palace walls. Shi-an remained frozen in place, his mind reeling. His mother had hired an assassin. The target could only be Wei-jun. And the timing, during the wedding ceremony, when the crown prince would be most exposed and vulnerable. Part of him wanted to storm into her chambers and demand answers. Another part whispered seductively that he could simply do nothing, let events unfold as his mother planned, and inherit everything he'd ever wanted. But as he stood in those shadows, he saw Wei-jun's face from their library conversation, the genuine gratitude, the recognition of Shi-an's service and sacrifice. His brother might be naive, but he wasn't cruel. He'd never asked to be born first, never demanded that Shi-an bear the burden of the kingdom's ugly necessities. And Kaixia, if Wei-jun died at their wedding, she would be destroyed. The gentle priestess who saw good in everyone, even in him, would carry that trauma for the rest of her life. Shi-an slipped away from his mother's door with his choice already made. He wouldn't let his brother die, regardless of what it cost him. But how could he warn Wei-jun without proof? His brother would demand evidence, and the investigation would destroy their family and plunge the kingdom into chaos. No, there had to be another way. A way to save Wei-jun without revealing the poison that had infected their own blood. Meanwhile, on the other side of the palace, Wei-jun paced his own chambers, unable to shake Captain Minghao's warnings about unusual activities around the temple. His conversation with Shi-an earlier had left him unsettled, torn between love for his brother and growing suspicion about his true intentions. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called. To his surprise, Kaixia stepped through the doorway, her usual white robes replaced by a simple dress suitable for moving through the palace unobserved. "Kaixia," he said, quickly composing himself. "What brings you here so late?" "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, her face pale in the lamplight. "The gods send me dreams of darkness approaching, and I felt drawn to seek you out." "What kind of darkness?" She moved closer, her eyes searching his face. "I see a great choice approaching, one that will change everything. Someone stands at a crossroads where every path leads to pain, but one path leads to redemption." "Who?" "The visions are unclear," she said softly. "But I sense the darkness doesn't come from where we expect. Sometimes the greatest love hides behind masks of hatred, and the deepest loyalty is found in the most unexpected places." Before Wei-jun could ask what she meant, urgent footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. They both turned as Captain Minghao's voice called out, "Your Highness, forgive the intrusion, but we've received word of suspicious activities near the temple. Armed men have been seen in the vicinity." Wei-jun opened the door to find his captain looking grimmer than usual. "What sort of armed men?" "The sort who kill for gold, my lord. I believe there may be a plot against your life during tomorrow's ceremony." Kaixia gasped, her hand flying to her throat. But instead of fear, Wei-jun saw a strange sort of recognition in her eyes, as if puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. "Double the guards," Wei-jun ordered. "Search every inch of the temple and surrounding buildings. If there are assassins in my city, I want them found." "Already done, Your Highness." "But..." Captain Minghao hesitated. "But what?" "Prince Shi-an has been asking very specific questions about our security arrangements. And he was seen near the eastern wing tonight, close to Queen Qingfen's chambers." The words hit Wei-jun like physical blows. His own brother, plotting with their mother to kill him on his wedding day. Part of him had suspected, but hearing it confirmed felt like having his heart carved out with a dull blade. "I see," he said quietly, though his world was crumbling around him. After the captain left, Kaixia moved to his side, her presence a warm comfort in the suddenly cold room. "The choice I spoke of," she said softly. "I believe it approaches sooner than we thought. And I think you may be surprised by who makes it." As dawn approached and still no sleep came, Wei-jun found himself praying to the same gods Kaixia served, asking them to protect not just his kingdom, but the broken bonds of family that had once been his whole world. In a few hours, he would walk into the temple knowing that death waited for him somewhere in the crowd. The question was whether he would live long enough to see who truly stood behind the arrow meant for his heart. In the depths of his chambers, Shi-an sat in meditation position on the bare stone floor, his mind focused on the impossible choice before him. Dawn crept through the narrow window, painting everything in shades of rose and gold, colors that reminded him painfully of Kaixia's gentle beauty. Tomorrow, if he said nothing, Wei-jun would die. The woman he loved would become a widow before she was truly a wife, and he would inherit a crown stained with his brother's blood. The terrible truth was that part of him had always wanted it. That dark, hungry part of his soul that had spent years in Wei-jun's shadow whispered, "You've earned this. You've bled for this kingdom while he studied poetry. You've killed for the people who fear you while they love him for his gentle words." But every time that voice spoke, he remembered a summer afternoon when they were boys. He'd been practicing sword forms alone in the garden when Wei-jun had appeared with bandages and healing salve. "You're hurt," his older brother had said, examining the cuts on Shi-an's hands from training without proper protection. "It's nothing," young Shi-an had replied, trying to pull away. But Wei-jun had held firm, carefully cleaning and binding each wound. "Father says pain makes us strong," he'd said quietly. "But I think kindness does too. You don't have to hurt alone. Brothers protect each other." Even then, Wei-jun had understood something that their father never would. That strength came in many forms, and the strongest bonds were built on compassion, not fear. A soft knock interrupted his meditation. Roman entered with the pre-dawn meal, his weathered face creased with worry. "Your Highness, you haven't slept. Perhaps you should rest before the ceremony." "Rest is a luxury I can't afford tonight," Shi-an replied, but he accepted the simple rice and tea gratefully. "If I may speak freely, my lord." "You may. In all the years I've served you, I've never seen you so troubled. Not after the bloodiest battles, not during the darkest campaigns. Whatever weighs on your heart, perhaps sharing the burden would ease it." For a moment, Shi-an was tempted to tell him everything. Roman had been more father to him than the king ever was, had seen him through nightmares and wounds and the gradual hardening that came with each war he fought. "Some burdens can't be shared," he said finally. "Some choices must be faced alone." After Roman departed, Shi-an rose and moved to the weapon rack that dominated one wall of his chamber. His fingers traced the familiar weight of his preferred blade, balanced, deadly, an extension of his will made manifest in steel. Today, this sword would either save his brother's life or end his own. Perhaps both. As morning light grew stronger, he heard the sounds of wedding preparations beginning throughout the palace. Servants bustling with flowers and silk, guards taking their positions, guests arriving to witness what should be the happiest day in the royal family's recent memory. Instead, it would be the day everything changed forever. A final knock came at his door, not Roman this time, but his mother. Queen Qingfen entered with her usual grace, though her eyes held a sharpness that spoke of plans in motion. "My son," she said, embracing him with maternal warmth that felt like poison against his skin. "Are you prepared for what today will bring?" "I'm always prepared," he replied carefully. "Good." Her smile was predatory. "By sunset, you'll have everything you've ever deserved. The crown, the respect, the love that has been denied you for too long. And if I don't want it at such a price?" Her expression hardened. "You've spent 16 years being the kingdom's sword while your brother played at being its heart. How many times have you bled for people who fear your very name? How many enemies have you killed in service to a crown that will never truly be yours?" Wei-jun didn't choose to be born first. "No, but I chose to ensure my son wouldn't spend his life bowing to his lesser." She moved closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "The archer is in position. When Wei-jun takes the priestess's hand for their sacred vows, justice will finally be served. You need only stay silent and let fate take its course." After she left, Shi-an stood alone in his chamber, understanding at last the full scope of his mother's ambition. She had orchestrated everything: the wedding ceremony, the positioning, the perfect moment when his brother would be most vulnerable and exposed. But she had made one crucial error. She assumed her son was as hungry for power as she was. She never considered that he might value his brother's life more than a crown built on betrayal. As the sun climbed higher and guests began filling the temple for the ceremony, Shi-an made his final preparations. He strapped on his sword, not for ceremony but for battle. He wrote 3 letters, one to Wei-jun apologizing for years of coldness, one to Kaixia asking her forgiveness for loving her in silence, and one to his father confessing everything about Queen Qingfen's plot. Then he walked toward the temple, knowing that within hours, Prince Shi-an would be dead. The only question was whether he would die as a hero or a villain. The wedding bells began to toll, their joyous sound echoing across the kingdom like a funeral dirge. In the temple, Kaisia would be donning her wedding robes, her heart full of love and hope for the future. If Shi-an had his way, she would keep that happiness, whatever it cost him. The wedding morning dawned clear and bright, with no hint of the tragedy that would unfold before sunset. In the temple, priestesses helped Kaisia don her ceremonial robes of white silk embroidered with silver threads, while in the palace, servants dressed Prince Wei-jun in the blue and gold regalia of a royal bridegroom. But Wei-jun felt no joy as he stood before his bronze mirror, watching the final preparations. The warnings from Captain Minghao, the suspicious activities around the temple, his own brother's pointed questions about security, all of it pointed toward a plot that would turn his wedding day into a funeral. "Your Highness," Captain Minghao said quietly, approaching with a light shirt of mail. "Perhaps you should wear this beneath your ceremonial robes." "No," Wei-jun replied firmly. "If I die today, let it be as a bridegroom, not a warrior. Let the people remember joy, not fear. Then at least allow me to position additional archers along the temple walls. If there is an assassin, we'll spot him before he can lose his shot." Wei-jun nodded his consent, though he wondered if any number of guards could stop a determined killer, especially one who had inside knowledge of their security arrangements. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. To his surprise, Shi-an entered, wearing formal robes of midnight blue with silver accents. The colors suited him, making his dark hair shine like polished obsidian, but there was something different about his bearing this morning. A strange sort of peace, as if he had finally resolved some long internal struggle. "Brother," Shi-an said, bowing with unusual formality. "I came to wish you well on your wedding day." "Thank you," Wei-jun replied, studying his brother's face for any sign of deception. "Your presence at the ceremony means a great deal." "Does it?" Something flickered in Shi-an's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or pain. "I thought my presence was merely tolerated." "You're my brother. My only brother." The word seemed to hit Shi-an like a physical blow. For a moment, his carefully controlled composure cracked, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. "Wei-jun," he began, then stopped, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "What is it?" "I want you to know that everything I've done, every choice I've made, has been because..." He struggled with words that seemed to stick in his throat like thorns. "Because family is more precious than crowns or glory or any treasure this world can offer." "I know," Wei-jun said softly and meant it. Despite all his suspicions, despite all the warnings, he still remembered the boy who had once carried him home when he was hurt, who had shared his small treasures and defended him against bullies in the training yard. Shi-an's smile was bittersweet as winter sunlight. "You always were too trusting for your own good. It will make you a better king than I ever could have been." "What do you mean, could have been?" But Shi-an had already turned toward the door. He paused without looking back, his shoulders rigid with emotion. "Brother, whatever happens today, remember that blood runs deeper than ambition or resentment. Remember that love can hide behind masks of hatred, and that sometimes the greatest sacrifice looks like betrayal." Then he was gone, leaving Wei-jun alone with questions that had no answers and a growing certainty that this wedding day would end in ways none of them could imagine. As the morning progressed, guests began arriving at the temple. Nobles in their finest silks, ministers in ceremonial robes, common folk pressed against the outer walls hoping for a glimpse of their future queen, all of them innocent of the blood that might be spilled on this sacred ground. Captain Minghao made his final report. "The temple is as secure as we can make it, Your Highness. Every balcony is watched, every entrance guarded. If there is an assassin, we'll see him before he can act." But as Wei-jun walked toward the temple where his bride waited, he couldn't shake the feeling that the greatest threat might come from someone they would never suspect, someone who knew all their security arrangements, someone who had access to every part of the sacred building. Someone like his own brother. The temple bells began to ring, calling all the kingdom to witness what should have been the happiest day of Prince Wei-jun's life. Instead, he walked toward his wedding ceremony knowing that death waited somewhere in the crowd, wearing a familiar face he was no longer sure he could trust. In the shadow of the temple walls, Shi-an moved through the pre-ceremony preparations with the focused calm of a warrior preparing for his final battle. Servants bustled past carrying flowers and banners, their faces bright with celebration, unaware that death walked among them in royal robes. He made his way to the temple's upper levels, his knowledge of the building's layout gained through careful study over the past week. Every corridor, every balcony, every sightline, he had memorized them all under the guise of security concerns. On the eastern balcony, partially concealed behind a stone column, he found what he was looking for: a man with calloused hands and predator's eyes, assembling a bow designed for silence and accuracy. The assassin worked with professional efficiency, his movements economical and deadly. "You're early," the killer murmured without turning around, apparently mistaking Shi-an for someone else, perhaps his mother's messenger. "I wanted to confirm the arrangements," Shi-an replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his soul. "Simple enough. When the prince takes his vows, I loose the arrow. Quick death, clean escape through the servant passages." The assassin's tone was businesslike, as if discussing market prices. "Your queen mother pays well for such straightforward work." Rage blazed through Shi-an's chest, but he kept his voice level. "And if there are complications?" "There won't be. I've killed princes before." The man turned slightly, and Shi-an saw the flat, empty eyes of someone who had long ago traded his soul for gold. "Though I admit, I wasn't expecting the target's own brother to be involved in the planning." The words confirmed what Shi-an had suspected. His mother had told the assassin he was complicit in the plot. She had used his name to legitimize her scheme, making him appear to be a willing participant in fratricide. "Tell me," Shi-an said conversationally, "have you ever killed a prince who saw you coming?" The assassin's eyes narrowed with sudden wariness. "What?" Steel whispered from its sheath as Shi-an's blade found the gap between the man's ribs, piercing his heart before he could cry out. The killer toppled forward, his bow clattering uselessly to the stone floor. "Now you have," Shi-an said quietly, cleaning his blade on the dead man's cloak. He dragged the body behind a storage alcove where it wouldn't be discovered until after the ceremony, then took the assassin's position behind the column. From here, he could see the temple's main altar where Wei-jun and Kaixia would soon pledge their lives to each other. But Shi-an wasn't naive enough to believe his mother had relied on a single killer. Somewhere else in this temple, another archer waited with orders to finish what the first had started. She was too careful, too ambitious, to leave anything to chance. All he had done was buy time. The morning sun climbed higher as guests continued filling the temple below. Nobles in their finest silks, ministers in formal robes, common folk pressed against the outer walls hoping for a glimpse of their future queen. All of them unknowing, all of them innocent of the blood that had already been spilled in these sacred halls. Then she appeared, and Shi-an's breath caught in his throat. Kaixia moved down the temple aisle like captured starlight, her white and silver robes flowing around her with ethereal grace. A crown of jasmine flowers adorned her dark hair, and her face glowed with joy so pure it made Shi-an's chest ache with longing he could never voice. She was beautiful. She was radiant. In minutes, she would be his brother's wife. Wei-jun waited at the altar in his blue and gold ceremonial robes, looking every inch the prince he was born to be. When Kaixia reached him and took his offered hand, the smile that passed between them could have illuminated the entire kingdom. From his hidden position, Shi-an watched the couple he loved most in the world prepare to bind their lives together, knowing that one assassin's arrow could shatter everything beautiful about this moment. "Beloved guests," the high priest intoned, his voice carrying across the packed temple, "we gather today to witness the sacred union of Crown Prince Wei-jun and Priestess Kaixia, blessed by the gods and celebrated by all the kingdom. The ceremony began with ancient chants and ritual blessings. Incense perfumed the air as the couple knelt before the altar, their heads bowed in reverence to powers greater than earthly crowns. Shi-an barely heard the sacred words. His attention focused on the shadows, searching every balcony and alcove for the glint of steel or the subtle movement that would reveal the second assassin's position. His mother had been thorough. She wouldn't have relied on a single archer. But where? The western balcony offered a decent angle but poor escape routes. The northern gallery was too exposed. The southern... There. A figure in servant's clothing, moving with careful precision along the southern balcony. Something long and dark in his hands, partially concealed by flowing robes that marked him as temple staff. Shi-an's muscles tensed as recognition dawned. Not just any servant, he knew that face. Hanfei, one of the temple's junior priests, a young man whose family had fallen on hard times. His mother had found another desperate soul to corrupt with gold and false promises. Now the couple will speak the vows that bind their souls before gods and mortals, the high priest announced. Wei-jun and Kaixia rose, their hands joined, their faces luminous with love and hope for the future they would build together. I, Wei-jun of the House of Shi-an, take you, Kaixia of the Temple of Light, as my wife and queen. His brother's voice rang clear across the temple. I pledge my heart, my honor, and my life to your happiness. I, Kaixia of the Temple of Light, take you, Wei-jun of the House of Shi-an, as my husband and king, she replied, her voice soft but carrying in the sacred silence. I pledge my heart, my prayers, and my devotion to your worthy reign. On the southern balcony, the false priest raised his bow. Time crystallized into perfect clarity. Shi-an saw the arrow nocked, the string drawn back, the aim settling on his brother's heart. He saw Wei-jun's face glowing with joy, unaware that death approached on silent wings. He saw Kaixia's tears of happiness that would soon become tears of grief. And in that moment of absolute clarity, Shi-an understood what he had to do. He had spent his life being the kingdom's sword, the prince who handled ugly necessities so others could remain pure. One final act of service, one last duty to perform for the people he loved more than his own worthless life. Shi-an vaulted over the balcony rail. The arrow sang through the morning air, its fletched shaft cutting through incense and sunlight toward the heart of the crown prince. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Prince Wei-jun felt the world shift around him like sand beneath an earthquake. A shadow fell across his vision, midnight blue robes and wild dark hair, as his brother Shi-an crashed into him from above, their bodies colliding in a tangle of silk and desperation. They tumbled to the temple floor behind the altar, Shi-an's weight driving the breath from Wei-jun's lungs. But it wasn't until warm wetness spread across his ceremonial robes that Wei-jun understood what had happened. No, he gasped, rolling Shi-an over to see the arrow buried deep in his brother's chest, just below the heart. Blood, bright as temple poppies, bloomed across the midnight silk like a horrific flower opening to the sun. Around them, the temple erupted in chaos. Guests screamed and scattered like leaves in a storm wind, nobles and commoners alike fleeing the sanctuary that had become a slaughterhouse. Palace guards rushed forward with drawn swords, searching for enemies in the rafters. But Wei-jun saw none of it. His world had narrowed to his brother's face, already pale as winter moonlight, and the terrible knowledge in those familiar dark eyes. Shi-an, Wei-jun whispered, pressing his hands against the wound, trying to stem the flow of blood that pulsed between his fingers like a dying heartbeat. Why? Why did you? Had to, Shi-an gasped, each word carved from pain and failing breath. Couldn't let her kill you. Her? Who? Mother. The word emerged on a bubble of blood and betrayal. She hired killers for the ceremony. Shi-an's lips curved in a ghost of his old sardonic smile, though crimson flecked his teeth. always was too ambitious for her own good. Understanding crashed over Wei-jun like a tide of ice. The conversation fragments he'd overheard, his mother's voice speaking of arrangements. It hadn't been Shi-an plotting his murder. It had been Shi-an discovering the plot and struggling with how to stop it without destroying their family. "You knew," Wei-jun said, the words torn from his throat. "You knew and you saved me." "Someone had to," Shi-an whispered, his voice growing weaker with each breath. "Brothers protect each other. You taught me that long time ago." "I was wrong about everything," Wei-jun sobbed, cradling his brother's head against his chest. "God help me, I was so wrong." Kaisia appeared beside them, her white wedding robes already stained crimson as she knelt in the spreading pool of blood. Her face streaked with tears, but her hands were steady as a healer's as she examined the wound with desperate hope. "Can you save him?" Wei-jun demanded, though he could see the answer in her grief-stricken eyes. The arrow had gone too deep, found too many vital places. Even the greatest physicians in the kingdom couldn't undo such damage. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," Shi-an said, his gaze finding her face with effort. "Don't weep for me. I was never worth your tears." "You're wrong," Kaisia replied fiercely, catching his hand and pressing it to her cheek. "You're wrong about so many things. You saved him. You saved us all." Shi-an's eyes widened with something like wonder. "All these years, I thought you feared me, like everyone else." "I saw your pain," she said softly. "I saw the lonely boy behind the warrior's mask. I prayed for you every day, hoping you would find peace." "And I did," he breathed, his gaze moving between her face and Wei-jun's. "I found it, right here." In this moment, his fingers found Wei-jun's hand, their grip weak but determined. "I need you to know, I never hated you. Never. I envied you, resented the love that came so easily to you, but..." His voice faltered, then strengthened with final purpose. "But I loved you more than I hated anything. You were the best of us. You were braver than I ever was," Wei-jun replied, his voice breaking on sobs he couldn't control. "All those wars, all those campaigns, you bore that burden so I wouldn't have to. And I never thanked you properly. Didn't need thanks. Just..." Shi-an's breath hitched, blood frothing at his lips. "Just needed to know you didn't think I was a monster. Never. You were my brother. You were the best man I knew, and it took me far too long to see it." Something like joy flickered in Shi-an's fading eyes. "Take care of the kingdom," he whispered, his grip on Wei-jun's hand growing slack. "Be the king I could never be. Gentle but strong. Loved, not feared. I will. I promise." Shi-an's gaze found Kaisia one last time, drinking in her beauty as if trying to carry it with him into whatever came next. "And you, gentle priestess, thank you for seeing the man I wanted to be, instead of the weapon I became. You were always more than a weapon," she said, her tears falling like rain on his upturned face. "You were love disguised as duty, sacrifice hidden behind strength. You were exactly who you needed to be." His smile was radiant then, transforming his features into something beautiful and peaceful. Then perhaps it was enough. The light began to fade from his eyes, but his grip on Wei-jun's hand remained firm until the very end. "Remember me not as the tyrant prince, but as the brother who finally chose love over fear." Those were his last words. Prince Shi-an of the House of Shi-an died in his brother's arms on what should have been the happiest day of Wei-jun's life, surrounded by the wreckage of a wedding ceremony and the echo of love finally spoken before it was too late. In the silence that followed, as palace guards found the second assassin's body on the southern balcony and Queen Xingfen was dragged away in chains, Wei-jun held his brother close and wept for all the years they'd lost to misunderstanding and pride. The arrow in the temple had found its mark, but not the one intended. And in taking that arrow, Shi-an had saved more than just his brother's life. He had finally earned the love he'd always craved but never believed he deserved. 1 year later, King Wei-jun walked the memorial garden that had been built where the old armory once stood. White flowers bloomed between carefully placed stones, and a fountain played softly at the center, its water catching the afternoon sunlight like scattered diamonds. At the heart of the garden stood a simple monument of black marble, not the elaborate tomb befitting a prince, but a modest stone bearing only a name and the words that had defined his brother's final choice. Brothers protect each other. You come here every day, Queen Kaixia observed, joining him beside the memorial stone. They had married 3 months after Shi-an's funeral, in a quiet ceremony that bore no resemblance to the grand celebration that had ended in blood and sacrifice. But their love had grown deeper for surviving such tragedy, tempered by loss into something unbreakable. I promised him I'd remember, Wei-jun replied, placing fresh jasmine flowers at the base of the stone. Not as the tyrant prince, but as the brother who chose love over fear. Kaixia took his hand, their wedding rings, simple bands of gold without ostentation, catching the sun. The kingdom prospers under your rule. The people speak of the mercy you showed even to those who betrayed you. Queen Qingfin lived still, though confined to a tower room where she would spend her remaining years. Wei-jun had commuted her death sentence to exile within the palace walls, not from love, for that had died with her treachery, but because Shi-an had died saving his life. Executing their mother would have stained that sacrifice with more blood. He would have shown them mercy too, Wei-jun said quietly. He was gentler than anyone knew. I just never took the time to see it. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the fountain's gentle music and the distant laughter of children playing in the palace courtyards. The sound would have made Shi-an smile, Wei-jun thought. His brother had always watched the servants' children with something like hunger, as if trying to remember what innocence looked like. The northern provinces report excellent harvests this year, Kaixia said eventually. And the mountain clans sent gifts to honor your brother's memory. They say he was the fiercest warrior they ever faced, but also the most honorable. He earned their respect the hard way, Wei-jun replied, with sword and shield in his own blood. While I studied in comfort, he fought for our people in places where death waited behind every tree. And now those same people sing songs about the prince who died for love. The bards call him the Shadow Knight, the warrior who stepped from darkness into light. Wei-jun touched the monument once more, his fingers tracing the carved letters of his brother's name. Tomorrow would bring the usual burdens of kingship, grain distributions to plan, trade agreements to negotiate, the 1,000 small decisions that kept a kingdom running smoothly. But tonight, he would remember a boy who had shared his childhood games and secret treasures, who had grown into a man capable of the greatest sacrifice imaginable. Do you think he knew? Kaixia asked suddenly. That saving you would heal the kingdom as well as protect it? Wei-jun considered the question, remembering his brother's final words, the peace that had settled over his features as he died. I think he knew exactly what his choice would cost and what it would save. Shi-an always was too clever for his own good. The people will remember him as a hero. They should. He was the bravest man I ever knew. Wei-jun's voice carried across the memorial garden like a prayer, and the most loving, though he hid it behind armor and bitter words. As the sun began to set, painting the white flowers in shades of rose and gold, King Wei-jun made the same promise he made every evening. I'll be the king you believed I could be, brother. Gentle but strong, loved but not weak. And I'll make sure our people remember that sometimes the greatest love looks like sacrifice, and the truest loyalty is found in the most unexpected places. The wind stirred the memorial flowers, carrying their perfume into the evening air like incense for the departed. And if Wei-jun imagined he could hear his brother's voice on that wind, warm now, free of pain and bitterness, whispering words of approval and love, He chose to believe it was more than just the echo of memory. In the kingdom of Darien, they would tell the story for generations, of two princes who loved each other despite themselves, of an arrow that found the wrong heart and saved the right kingdom, and of a sacrifice that proved love could conquer even the deepest darkness when it was willing to pay the ultimate price. The arrow in the garden had bloomed into something beautiful after all.